It's terribly difficult, and nobody wants to shut the country down on a whim. On a final note, ending a bit of a tough day really, on something really quite different. Do clocks out of time bother you? As the Otago Daily Times reports, the Dunedin Municipal Chambers clock is 6 minutes ahead of schedule. Now that raises the question of how many people are arriving early to work due to marking the time by this clock tower, or does everyone in Dunedin just know that this clock runs fast? If you are in Dunedin, I'd love to know what you think about this, because I used to go past that clock every day, and I must admit I do get a little bit of annoyed. It's a bit of a bugbear of mine when a public clock tower doesn't tell the exact time. So I thought I'd go around the panel. Shane Tapo, you first. Do clocks out of time annoy you?
Every single clock in our house, except on my phone, is set 6 minutes in advance because can be a little bit slack, so I like it.
Do you still wear a watch?
I wear a watch. I wear a watch, but I hardly ever look at it, normally on my phone.
What do you think, Cindy? Do you think that municipal clocks and public towers, do they have a bit of a responsibility to maintain absolutely accurate time? Is 6 minutes ahead of schedule just a bit over the top?
I do think they have a responsibility because they are the line in the sand. However, I have to agree with Shane. The clock in my car is set 6 minutes ahead because I used to be late all the time, and I've worked out that being late to meetings is really disrespectful. And I'm, working really hard on those sorts of things. But I do think that the things that we rely on, like the Dunedin Municipal Chambers clock, should be on time.
Yes.
And then we can choose to set ourselves set our own clocks a little bit further ahead.
It just gives you a bit of a sense of security and stability, doesn't it, Cindy, to know that the public clock in the local town square is absolutely bang on.
Yes, absolutely. You've got to be able to rely on something, don't you? And you keep going online, what's the time here? My daughter's overseas, what's the time in Etchweiler at the moment, etc. But, I think there are some things that one should be able to rely on, and the Dunedin Municipal Chambers clock is one of them.
Can you recall a clock tower where you grew up? I'm just thinking of great clock towers now, Shane, and I'm thinking of the wonderful...
No clock tower in Kawerau whatsoever.
Not even half a one.
Not even a tower.
Not even a tower. I can recall a wonderful one alongside the Dunedin one, which is beautiful. The Te Aroha clock is a wonderful one. Wallace, as someone who is often late, I think it helps to be on one's toes when it comes to the time. Hence, I scramble the clocks in my house somewhere between 2 to 5 minutes, always ahead of time. Thank you for joining us today. It's been wonderful. And Cindy Mitchner and Shane Tapo, thank you very much for being on the panel.
Oh, thank you for having us, Wallace.
I'm Wallace Chapman. Yep. I'm Wallace Chapman. Checkpoint is next. Do stay with us. Back tomorrow, 3:45. Till then, see ya.
This is Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Lisa Owen. Haere Akine, the Director General of Health, orders swathes of people to isolate in their homes until they're contacted by health officials. We'll tell you who they are. It follows news of 4 more probable cases of the coronavirus in the community. So COVID is back, but how exactly did it get back into the community again? The Health Minister joins us live. Auckland is effectively cut off from the rest of the country by road at least, with military and police controlling checkpoints. It was gridlock in the city too, as supermarkets were mobbed and hundreds queued for COVID tests. We'll talk to the boss of a Mount Wellington company caught up in the current outbreak, and many businesses in our biggest city have been forced to close. Can they survive a second round of COVID?
RNZ News at 5. Kia ora ko Susana Leia tawa tēnei. 4 probable cases of COVID-19 have been identified that are linked to the 4 confirmed members of a South Auckland family. As well, there is 1 new case of a returned traveller in managed isolation. The Director-General of Health says 2 of the probable cases are colleagues and 2 are from related households. Ashley Bloomfield says there are no close contacts of the family confirmed in Rotorua, where they visited at the weekend, and the city will remain at level 2. But he says people who visited Waiora Lakeside Hotel, the Skyline Gondola and Heritage Farm, and 3D Gallery should be vigilant. Dr Bloomfield has issued orders to people linked to 2 workplaces in Auckland as authorities move to track down and test possible contacts of the 4 confirmed cases. Any employees or contractors of Americold and Finance Now, as well as visitors or people who live with those groups, are to self-isolate. The Director-General says testing and contact tracing have ramped up significantly. As part of the efforts to stop any further community transmission, he issued this order to employees and families of the Cool Store Company and Finance Company.
To isolate at their usual home and to not go out to work and remain isolated until they are contacted by our National Contact Tracing Service and they receive further direction.
Ashley Bloomfield says it's a significant and serious step for him to take, but that reflects the risk to the public. The Prime Minister says people will be familiar with the restrictions in place in Auckland and the rest of the country as they're based on the same rules as the lockdown earlier in the year. But Jacinda Ardern says there are 2 key differences. Businesses have 1 week to get a mandatory government QR contact tracing code clearly displayed on their premises and a requirement for people catching flights out of Auckland.
To wear a face covering on a plane. We are specific to planes here because of the close proximity. Of course, we continue to ask people to only use this form of transport if they're leaving Auckland because it is not their primary place of residence and they need to relocate themselves.
Jacinda Ardern says targeted financial support for Auckland is being considered if the lockdown goes much longer than the 3 days. Ministers will make further decisions about lockdown restrictions in Auckland and elsewhere on Friday. The New Zealand First Leader says it's irresponsible of National to try to lay the blame of the resurgence of community transmission on the government. National's leader Judith Collins says it's devastating that the public were told the country didn't have COVID-19 in the community, and now it does. She says that she will be looking for straight answers from the government about how it allowed this to happen. But Winston Peters says National's politicking is haphazard and careless.
Well, they were calling for the borders to be open with China. Are they vindicated now? I mean, how many times can you go off and rashly, irresponsibly make statements like they have and then think that people are going to give them any credence? I wish they would actually understand that it's not about politics right now. It's about the health and safety of New Zealanders.
Winston Peters. 7 new pop-up community testing centres opened across Auckland this afternoon as the response to the latest COVID-19 cases ramps up. The Auckland Regional Public Health Service also announced today that work is underway to get more pop-ups operating by Thursday morning and to increase the number of mobile testing units. The pop-ups that opened this afternoon are in Wellsford, Warkworth, Silverdale, St Luke's, Botany, Takanini and Waiheke Island. The Reserve Bank says the mortgage deferral scheme due to run out at the end of next month will be extended. The Governor, Adrian Orr, says the extension is still being worked out with the banks, but further details will be released next week. It's 4 minutes past 5. The final round of netball's ANZ Premiership has been called off due to the change in COVID-19 alert levels around the country. Netball New Zealand has declared all matches a draw, but still hopes to go ahead with the finals weekend in Invercargill next week, where the defending champions Central Pulse will play the mainland Tactics in the grand final. The decision to make all matches a draw has had no effect on placings for the finals series, and Netball New Zealand Chief Executive Jenny Wiley says planning for Invercargill is already well underway.
We're really positive about getting a grand final in. Obviously, there'll be some protocols that we need to consider, but we've got thinking around that underway already, and we hope to be able to make a decision early next week.
Jenny Wiley. New Warriors coach Nathan Brown has wasted little time adding to the rugby league club's playing roster for next season. The Warriors have boosted their forward pack with the signing of nearly 2 metre tall, 110 kilogram Parramatta Eels prop Kane Evans on a 2-year deal. Evans has played 108 NRL games for the Sydney Roosters and the Eels. The club has also signed St George Illawarra centre Ewan Atkin on a 3-year deal, according to the Australian media reports. And the former Highlanders midfielder and Samoa international Seilala Mapusua has been appointed the new head coach of the Manu Samoa rugby side. That's the news.
This is an official government COVID-19 announcement. The Auckland region is now at COVID-19 Alert Level 3. The rest of New Zealand has moved to Alert Level 2. Positive cases of COVID-19 have been identified in a household in the Auckland region. If you are in Auckland, stay home where possible and follow Alert Level 3 guidelines. This will stop the transmission of COVID-19 and save lives. For more information on the alert levels, go to covid19.govt.nz.
Now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow. Northland a few showers, Auckland to Kapiti including Coromandel, Bay of Plenty and Central High Country. Generally fine with a few cloudy areas, isolated showers about Coromandel and Taihape clearing tonight. Gisborne and Hawke's Bay scattered showers gradually clearing tomorrow. Wairarapa and Wellington a few showers clearing tonight and fine spells developing. Showers returning to Wellington tomorrow night. For Marlborough and Canterbury mostly fine with a few cloudy areas. Showers spreading north about Canterbury and the Kaikoura coast tomorrow. For Nelson, Bulla and Westland, fine apart from isolated showers in Bulla, spreading to Westland tomorrow. Otago, Southland and Fiordland, a few showers mainly about the south coast. Showers spreading elsewhere tomorrow morning and snow lowering to 400 metres in the south. Chatham Islands, cloudy periods, a few showers tomorrow night. RNZ National, it's coming up to 7.5 minutes past 5.
Thanks, Susanna, and welcome to Checkpoint. I'm Lisa Owen. The number of COVID cases in the community has likely doubled since last night, with health officials confirming there are 4 more probable cases linked to the Auckland outbreak. The 4 confirmed cases are from the same South Auckland family. 2 of the probable cases are from a connected household, and 2 are work colleagues of one of the confirmed cases. There was a separate further case reported in managed isolation today. The passenger in question travelled from Islamabad via Doha on August 7. In the past hour, the Director General of Health has used his special pandemic powers to order significant groups of people to isolate at home until they're spoken to by contact tracing services.
And that direction applies to the following people, if you could listen carefully. Any employees or contractors of 2 employers. One is Americold in the Mount Wellington suburb in Auckland, and the other is the company Finance Now, and that is the Dominion Road branch in Auckland. I would also say that the direction applies to the following, and that is any visitors to those workplaces in the last 14 days, and any people who ordinarily live with those employees or contractors or visitors.
Dr. Ashley Bloomfield there. It will be mandatory for all businesses in Auckland to display a QR code to allow people to track their movements. It's also been revealed family members who visited Rotorua while displaying COVID symptoms stayed at the Waiora Lakeside Hotel between August 8th and 11th and visited the Skyline Gondola on the 9th and the Heritage Farm and 3D Gallery on the 10th. Now, health officials say there are no close contacts in Rotorua, but people who were also in these places need to be vigilant about their health. Well, joining me now is the Health Minister, Chris Hipkins. Good evening, Minister. In terms of the stay-at-home order, how many people do you estimate are affected by that?
There could be a couple of hundred people. So the contact tracing is now well underway for all of them. But we're taking a very, very precautionary approach here. The Director General wants to make sure that they are isolating, that they are out of circulation, so that if any further of them have picked up COVID-19, that they're not spreading that.
So what checks will be done to make sure that that is the case? They are self-isolating?
Well, look, obviously we have an alert level 3 restriction across Auckland now, so that means that most people will be isolating, but the message really out of all of this is, each household will have a designated person they're sending to the supermarket. If someone falls into that category, they shouldn't be that designated person. We want them to stay home until they have had their tests done, until they have spoken to health officials. That contacting, that calling is happening now.
So when you say there's a group potentially of several hundred people, how long do you think it's going to take to get in touch with them all?
At least 200 calls had been made as of the last update that I got, which was about half an hour ago.
So what? How long is it going to take you to get through them all, Minister? What's the deadline?
They're working around the clock. We've got 160 people in a call centre making phone calls as we speak, so I imagine that will be done very quickly.
Okay, what is the modelling telling you about the likely infection rates? Because we know from Professor Sean Hendy, his modelling said, for every person infected that you find in the community who is not directly a border worker, there's likely to be 10 to 15 others. So by his modelling, we're talking to 40 to 60 other infected people. What's your modelling telling you?
Look, at the moment, the modelling could be a smaller number than that, or it could be a greater number than that.
What's the top end that you're looking at here in terms of your modelling?
Well, look, I think we're not focused so much on the modelling as we're focused on the testing and the contact tracing. We're basically going to run this thing to ground. So we're going to find every person who's come into contact with the positive cases. If any of them test positive, we'll find every person that's come into contact with them. And we're moving at speed to do that. So no one's messing around here. Now, the modelling is an interesting academic exercise. Far more important, though, is the testing and contact tracing, because that's actual people rather than hypothetical scenarios.
Understand that, and everybody does appreciate the efforts being made, but obviously you must be working within some parameters. So what's the top end of those?
Look, I don't have a top end. It'll be as many as it is, and we're geared up for that. So we've got contact tracing ability on stream now to be able to contact trace up to 350 positive cases per day. Now, bearing in mind we're dealing with four positive and 4 probable at the moment, so we've got lots of capacity there. We will do as many calls and as many contacts as we need to run this to ground.
So where do you think that this has come from?
At this point, it is a real puzzle, and I think that's one of the reasons that we moved very quickly last night, because it is a real puzzle. The family concerned have no known links at this point that can be identified with people who are working in managed isolation or in quarantine or at the border, or who have had the travel history, recent travel history. So that does make it a particularly, puzzling question, and that's one of the reasons why we are exercising an abundance of caution here, because we don't want to see community transmission take off again, and the faster we go through this exercise of testing and contact tracing to run it to ground, then the less likely that is.
So one of the companies involved is a cool storage and logistics company, right? So what consideration has been given to the virus potentially coming in on goods that potentially have been imported?
So we haven't discounted that as a possibility. The advice that we've had from the scientists is that that's a less likely scenario, but it certainly has not been ruled out as a scenario.
So what information gathering are you doing on those sites to rule that out or in?
So at the moment, there's one cold store site that seems to be the centre of the group at the moment. So site visits have been taking place today, and that will include testing on site.
Okay, you're increasing the number of testing facilities because in Auckland, they were overrun today. How many are we expecting to see before the end of the week in terms of testing sites?
In the next 24 hours, so we had further ones being stood up this afternoon. There were additional 6 that are being stood up this afternoon, and there are 3 more that are being stood up at 8 o'clock tomorrow morning, so that's 9 extra testing centres. 2 more, of course, were stood up first thing this morning. So we are doing everything we can to scale up testing as quickly as we can. And, of course, through GP practices, we're asking all GP practices to be able to undertake tests for people who need those tests. And that's the long-standing practice there. So we want to make sure that availability of testing is as wide as we can make it. But I guess I do have a word of caution to people. Some people are having to wait. Please be patient. Please do keep waiting and do get that test if you're showing symptoms.
Realistically, Minister, are we really going to be back at level 1 in Auckland by the weekend?
Look, I think we will know a lot more by Friday, Lisa, and that's one of the things, there are so many...
But you must have a bit of a feel for it now, because overnight we've gone from 4 cases, 4 confirmed, to an extra 4 probable, and now we've got several hundred people on stay-at-home orders. So, can you be clear with us about what you're thinking might happen on Friday?
No, the 4 probable cases at the moment are still closely connected to the 4 positive cases, so it could still be a reasonably tightly controlled group, or it might not be. And so at the moment we can't rule in or out any scenarios, but we will have a bit more of a sense of that in the next 48 hours. We're giving ourselves that time to really get on top of, what do we know about the situation, and then we'll, at the moment it would literally be crystal ball gazing for me to hypothesise what might happen on Friday, or what we might be able, what position we might be in on Friday.
What are Auckland schools being told around expectations for how long students are going to be learning remotely for? Because we're hearing up to 2 weeks, some of them are being told.
Look, at the moment, the guidance to schools is exactly the same it is to everybody else. These restrictions are in place until Friday, at which point, by Friday, we will have further notice about how long any future restrictions might be in place for. And again, at the moment, that's just a purely hypothetical scenario, because we literally just do not have enough information at this point to be able to make an informed decision around that.
Minister, before you go, how many people were tested already so far today in the Auckland area?
I don't have numbers for today. We had about well over 4,000 yesterday, but obviously very, very high numbers today. That'll take a wee while for them to tabulate that information, but we know that we're going to see a very high number of tests today.
And when are you expecting the results back from those workers already tested, those people already tested connected to the infected family?
Up to 10,000 test results will be processed overnight, possibly slightly more than that if they do what's called pooled testing. And obviously the labs are working around the clock to process tests as quickly as they can.
Appreciate your time this evening. That is the Health Minister, Chris Hipkins. And Auckland ground to a halt today as people rushed out to get supplies, COVID tests and work gear as the level 3 restrictions came into place. It was gridlock around the 6 testing centres across the super city. Despite warnings not to panic buy, supermarkets were mobbed as Auckland prepared for lockdown 2.0. Our reporter Nick Trubridge and camera operator Nick Monroe filed this report.
A new day in Auckland, and with it, a sense of deja vu. It's just after 6:30am at a COVID-19 drive-through testing station in Eden Terrace. The testing station doesn't open for another hour and a half, but a steady stream of cars are already joining the queue. With last night's announcement of 4 new community cases in the super city, triggering mass demand for testing.
I've been sick for a couple of days, so feeling that I should do my bit for the community and come on down and be tested.
I've just come down because I've got a little bit of a cold, so I thought, with everything that's going on, I just thought I'd just make sure I stay on the safe side pretty much.
5 minutes down the road in Mount Eden Village, shoppers are rushing to their local bakeries and fruit shops while they still can.
This morning, I just zoomed into City Cake Company to grab a birthday cake for one of our team members, who happens to be my daughter as well. No birthday party today, but we have the cake, so everyone's coming into work. They're going to grab what they can do to work from home, and they're going to grab a piece of cake and then go.
Last night's announcement came as a shock to shoppers here, including Annie, who has stocked up for her first meal of this new lockdown.
I rang all my neighbours last night. I texted them, just to make sure they heard the news. And this was about 10:30, and I text them all and I said, just, if you heard the news, and yes, Annie, I've heard the news, I've heard, just to make sure. I rang everybody that I, know. I got potatoes, bread, eggs, milk, tuna fish, and avocado, and, all the essentials, I think.
It's nearly 9am in Mount Eden, and Casey Lou Fruit Centre, like thousands of other Auckland businesses, is preparing to close its doors. Its aisles will be empty for at least 3 days under level 3 lockdown restrictions, though the store will still be open for contactless collections and deliveries. For Frances Liu, it's a reality she never hoped she'd face again.
It's, been a bit uncertain, had a few order cancellations from the hospitality side of things, and probably the main feeling is just a little bit of frustration that, we've come back to where we are, but we've got to get on with it, but also now uncertainty as to what the next few days will bring.
Just down the road, Circus cafe barista Mamun Chowdhury doesn't mince his words.
Pretty hard to express by word. This is disaster. That's not the thing that we are on to level 3 or whatever level, because we thought we just over it, but it's still coming back.
Seafood Collective Mount Eden's Joanne Mahi is busy taping COVID-19 posters back on the windows of her fish shop in anticipation for customers picking up orders.
Gutted, yes, because we only opened in January, so a really terrible year to open a business. But so gutted to start with for the business, then, gutted for the whole country, and in Auckland in particular, and really gutted for that family.
Just off Dominion Road, an enormous queue of at least 300 people has formed outside Countdown Mount Eden. Many of these supermarkets closed last night, so staff could restock shelves to cope with the onslaught of demand.
We had to line up for a while because it was meant to open at 6, so I don't think it opened till like 6:30, and there was a big line. But yeah, it was fine. People probably aren't really social distancing, but it's probably just like how it was before, and everyone just freaks out a little bit. But there was heaps of food, and it was fine, yeah.
It's about 10 a.m. back at the Mount Eden testing site, and by now it's bedlam. Hundreds of vehicles are gridlocked up and down New North Road, with traffic each way stretching nearly a kilometre.
What was the wait like this morning?
I got here about 7 a.m. What's the time now? 2.5 hours.
Worth it?
Yeah, peace of mind.
Well, we came here at 8:30. Like we were here.
No, 7:30. 7:30. So 2 hours. 2 hours. Yeah.
You were prepared that it was going to be pretty busy today.
Yeah, absolutely. So we came a bit earlier than we knew opening time was, and staff are doing an amazing job. So we're grateful for what they're doing.
It's now close to 12 p.m, Auckland's official lockdown time. Ponsonby Road is jam-packed with motorists heading home. Cafes are bringing in outside seating, and takeaway joints are setting up tables so customers can pick up food without entering. Other retail shops are closing altogether. So it's deja vu in the super city, as it shuts up shop until midnight Friday at least. For Checkpoint, Nick Trubridge.
It is 23 minutes past 5 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. If you were listening to that on the radio, we'll put Nick's item up on our Facebook page so you can view the video. We're keen for your feedback on this. You can text us on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. We'd love to hear from you if you're a business is having to close during this period of time. How's it affecting you? And also, we'd love to hear from you if you're one of the people affected by the stay-at-home order issued a short time ago. While the cold store company in Auckland, where one worker has tested positive for COVID, is America Cold New Zealand, its employees, contractors and anyone who has visited their Mount Wellington site in the past 2 weeks have now been ordered to stay at home. The special direction issued by the Director General of Health in the last hour also applies to the families of those people who must now self-isolate until they are contacted by the Ministry of Health's tracing team. Now, joining me now from Melbourne is Americold's Managing Director, Richard Winnell. Thanks for joining us, Richard. I mean, what does the stay-at-home order mean for your staff and the business?
Yeah, hi there, Lisa. Firstly, what a shock to the system for all of us. We were advised last night after business closed by the Ministry of Health of the closure, and immediately we read that as a 48-hour closure, and so our attention went straight to our employees, getting them notified and supporting them through a testing and communication process with the Ministry. So, obviously business being closed for 48 hours is one thing, and then how we restart is another. But, first up, it's just the priority of our employees and getting them settled and their concerns allayed during this process.
So potentially with them self-isolating for 2 weeks, does that mean you're shut down for that whole time?
We're taking direction on that. What I think it appears for us at this stage is these employees will have to self-isolate for 14 days. At a certain point, we will get clearance to bring in other staff who potentially haven't been exposed or don't come into any contact tracing evidence and be able to bring them in to resume operations at the site. So we're still testing that theory, and we're hoping perhaps by the weekend that we can bring some normality back into that operation.
Richard, how many staff are you talking about at that site?
27 in total, so obviously the one in question with the positive COVID case, and then another 26 who are self-isolating and testing today.
So how was that, or how is that worker who is tested positive for coronavirus, and when was he last on your site?
He was last on the site about 9 days ago. He had the very good judgment of recognising an illness and isolating himself from work, so we applaud him for that, and I think that's making perhaps the contact tracing work a lot easier. So we haven't had him there for 9 days. However, there is a potential risk that there was transmission before he left. We haven't got evidence of that yet, so that's what the testing is all about. So that's what we know so far. By the way, we have been in contact with him today. We believe he's going okay.
So you have other locations as well, don't you? In Auckland?
Yes, we do.
So
we've got three other locations in Auckland. One other of those locations has been ordered to be shut by the Ministry of Health, which is in the Auckland Airport precinct. I don't believe there's any evidence that leads to that site being shut from a contact tracing or any other evidence point other than its geographic location, and a precautionary step by the Ministry of Health.
And how long's that for, Richard?
We believe that will be no longer than 48 hours. All employees, 20 employees at that site, being tested today. As soon as those results are back in, assuming they're clear, we'll be back to full operations again.
Okay, so just in terms of your business, so people understand this, you're like a cool store logistics style company. So a couple of things here. Do you have workers who travel overseas, or people who have come into your business who've had exemptions to get through the border?
Yes, so we're a global temperature-controlled logistics business. We run and operate large freezer and chiller warehouses for primarily the food logistics business. In answer to your question, Lisa, since phase one of COVID, the global pandemic, we have not had anyone in our business flying in or out of New Zealand.
So what is actually going on at the site then? Because the Ministry of Health has not yet ruled out the potential for the virus to come in on product. Is there any testing happening there?
Okay, so the site is shut. There's none of our employees in there. We're working with the Ministry of Health on, I believe, some swab work to rule out that there's been any transmission through product movement. We think that is improbable. We haven't got any other evidence around our global supply chain of that occurring, but it's an obvious place to look and to rule out as well in this case.
So do you have goods coming from the US and Australia, Melbourne, or any of those areas which have got high rates of COVID?
Yes, so the origin of some of these goods, I can't tell you straight away. I think there's a very large proportion of locally manufactured food in that facility, and there is a proportion of imported product. I can't tell you where it's been located, but it has come through typically a slow sea freight supply chain process. And I think as we work with the Ministry of Health on that, I think we'll probably come to rule that out as being an imported issue.
Right, so you're waiting for the swabs on the goods. So you've got all this product there and you supply people here in New Zealand. What's happening with your supply chain and your customers then? Because presumably their products are locked down right now.
Yeah, so I think we're fortunate. The food supply chain does have a lot of inventory sitting in it, from the grocery store, albeit there's a large pull coming on that, but back into the retailers have large distribution centres where they hold and pre-assemble goods for those stores, and then back into some of the manufacturers that sit behind that retail distribution network. So if you add all of that up, there's many, many weeks of supply typically in the food supply chain. So if we're looking at a 48-hour stoppage only, I don't think that will be felt by the end consumer.
Richard, you mentioned you haven't had any workers travelling overseas. I'm wondering, do you have any frontline airport workers like customs or border control who enter your work environment, or you mix with them?
No, we don't. Obviously, there are government departments that come and look at our food quality standards and related quality protocols. But no, there's none of our employees who are moving back and forth between airport and that front line. No.
Thanks for joining us this evening. That is the Managing Director of Americold, Richard Winnell, and his business is one of the ones where there's been a positive case of COVID. And coming up on Checkpoint on RNZ National, what happens if you have a flight booked to or from Auckland in the next few days? Air New Zealand boss Greg Foran joins us live. And what happens if level 3 lockdown lasts beyond midnight Friday? Can you head off to your batch? While Police Commissioner Andrew Costa will also join us live. And if we thought things were bad here, Victoria records 21 more deaths overnight. We would love your feedback on the situation and how it's affecting you. Don't forget you can text us on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or Facebook us Checkpoint, or send us an email. checkpoint@rnz.co.nz is the address. And right now it's time for the headlines with Susanna.
It's likely the number of COVID-19 cases in the community has doubled since last night, with confirmation there are 4 probable cases linked to the Auckland outbreak. 2 of the probable cases are colleagues of the South Auckland family, while 2 others are from related households. Rotorua will stay at alert level 2 following the family's visit to the city at the weekend. The Director General of Health, Dr Ashley Bloomfield, says there are no close contacts of the family in Rotorua, but he says people who visited the Waiora Lakeside Hotel, the Skyline Gondola, Heritage Farm and 3D Gallery should be vigilant. An order has been issued to people linked to 2 Auckland workplaces as health authorities move to track down and test possible contacts of the 4 confirmed cases. Any employees or contractors of Americold and Finance Now, as well as visitors or people who live with those groups, are to self-isolate. Businesses have 1 week to get a mandatory government QR contact tracing code clearly displayed on their premises. 7 new pop-up community testing centres opened across Auckland this afternoon as the response to the latest COVID-19 cases ramps up. Northern Region Health Coordination Centre lead Margie Upper says Aucklanders are seeking testing in high numbers and it's essential to provide as much access as possible. The pop-ups that opened this afternoon are in Wellsford, Warkworth, Silverdale, St Luke's, Botany, Takanini and Waiheke Island. A new safety campaign is aiming to ensure the increasing number of drone users know what the rules are. Research commissioned by the Civil Aviation Authority found a quarter of personal drone users don't know where or when they can fly their drones. Founder of the business Drones NZ, Jack Scott, says with more flyers, the rules are more important than ever. Those are the latest news headlines on RNZ National. Our next news and weather update is at 6.
Thanks, Susanna, and kia ora anō. This is Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen. It is time now for the business news with Giles Beckford, who joins us from our Wellington studio. So, Giles, what did we get out of the Reserve Bank today?
Well, we got a policy statement that was decidedly dovish and an assertion by the Reserve Bank that their foot will remain firmly pressed to the floor. They've kept the cash rate steady as they promised to at 0.25%. It'll stay that level until March next year at least. But the bond buying program, this is the scheme where they buy government bonds on the secondary market. That makes sure that there's money going through the financial system, but also helps them try and keep a lid on lending rates. They expanded that from $60 billion through to $100 billion. Now, that's a bit more than people were expecting. So the hint of a surprise there. That shows just a level of concern that they have, the fact that they want to keep on the front foot, they want to keep adding stimulus to the economy. They also spelt out a little bit more detail saying that they're preparing further tools for putting in place if needs be. One of those is negative interest rates, taking the cash rate below zero. And that would go hand in hand with a plan to lend money directly to the banks. So the Reserve Bank, of course, with the cash rate, say at 0.5% or minus 0.5%, would be essentially paying the banks to take money off it. But obviously, we'd have to say that retail customers and businesses wouldn't actually wouldn't see negative rates themselves, but it would keep that lid on borrowing costs, which is what it's all about for the Reserve Bank. We should also note that they've made mention today that they will extend the mortgage deferral scheme, which they're backing for the retail banks. We don't have details as to how long that will go on for. Details next week. But if it follows the Australian example, the scheme, which was due to run out next month, has been extended to the end of year in Australia. We might well see the same here. So all in all, a Reserve Bank on the front foot, saying it's willing to do whatever's necessary to keep the economy going, and emphasising the uncertainty. And the events overnight, of course, have just added to that stark warning.
Let's take a quick spin around the markets, Giles. What numbers have you got for us?
Share market had its worst session in a month. At one stage early on, it was down more than 2%. It's closed down 1.3%, 150 points at the 499. All the main stocks took a hit, but of course travel and tourism in particular. New Zealand dollar, it took a bit of a tumble after the Reserve Bank statement. 65.4 US cents, 91.9 Australian, and just a smidgen above 50 British pence.
Thanks, Giles. That's our business editor, Giles Beckford, joining us from our Wellington studio. Air New Zealand has rolled out a mandatory mask-wearing policy for all flights leaving Auckland. Public-facing staff and domestic cabin crew will now wear masks and gloves, and pilots will wear masks when interacting with customers or walking through terminals. Air New Zealand's CEO, Greg Foran, joins me now. Good evening, Greg. Has it been a busy day with people going in and out of Auckland?
It has been, Lisa, as people are returning home and either heading out or coming in, and we've been able to run exactly the schedule that we want to, and at the same time get ourselves organised around things like masks and discussions around social distancing. So it has been busy, but really pleased with how we're operating, and we just want to reassure all our customers and our staff that we've got this one, and the plan is coming into place.
Is there any suggestion you might need extra flights?
Not at this stage. So what we are seeing is obviously some customers are not showing up for flights. It's going to be different for flights both to and from Auckland versus what we're seeing in the regions, which is obviously on a different level at this stage, level 2 versus 3. But at this stage, we're happy with the number of flights that we have operating. It's something that we'll continue to review as the next few days unfold.
What has been the response to the masks?
I think it's been very positive from the feedback that I've received directly from our crews and teams at the airport. I think by far and away most people are very happy that we're out there and doing the right thing here. You can get a mask whether you're checking in or whether you're at the gate or whether you're on board, and compliance has been really good.
So you've had a few hiccups in the past with obviously cancellations and people not being able to take trips because of COVID. So what's happening with people who have booked flights that they potentially will not be able to take over the next few days? What are you saying to your customers?
Well, lots and lots of emails and texts and telephone calls, and one of the things that's an advantage is that we've been here before with this, so we were able to spool up our call centre and had an extra 100 people in there, and wait times. They were lengthy last night, but just recently I just spoke to the team there in these 2 minutes. I can assure you and all our customers that we're going to do what's right by them and ensure that if they had flights booked, we'll make sure they get a credit for that, and we've now got the tools in place for that to be handled much more efficiently. So, we're on top of that, feeling good about it, and we're there for our customers.
I'm wondering how close you were to kind of normal domestic occupancy rates, and are you worried that the situation we've got in Auckland now is going to run more than 3 days? I mean, what would that mean to you?
Well, we were really pleased with the way that, the number of flights came back as we came down through the levels previously. And, June was when we got down to level 1, and we saw really good demand through the school holidays, and we're really pleased with how we're going in August. Obviously, this is going to change things. The extent of that will depend, on how long this goes on and how wide it is. And at this stage, we know what you know, which is, we'll review the situation over the next few days and we'll see what eventuates next week. So it really just depends on the length of this and the depth of it.
I noticed that you had flights posted for Rarotonga, daily flights from the 24th of October. And obviously the Prime Minister has sort of raised some questions about the travel bubble now at all, given that it was based on the fact that we had no community transmission. How much of a blow will that be, not to have it by the end of the year?
Look, we started posting those when we had a sense that maybe that would be a matter of weeks away. There are customers who have obviously booked for those flights. Obviously, there's a good chance that those will now get put back. We had planned for flights into the Cook Islands in our forecast, not actually to occur quite this early. So, if it gets put back for a period of time, we're actually okay with that. But I do feel for the customers who were hoping to get away there for a winter break to some warmer temperatures.
Are all your staff and crews at the airport, are they all being tested?
In terms of testing for workers at the airport, my understanding is that we're in discussions with the Ministry of Health, and there is in Auckland a piece of work underway at the moment that will probably see workers at the airport, which would include our staff, tested.
As a result of this recent outbreak?
That's my understanding.
Okay. Look, last time we talked, we discussed the fact that Air New Zealand is looking for another $150 million in savings from the company, and I think it was about now you were looking to finalise details of that. So can we expect more job losses?
Too early to talk about what's occurred, obviously, in the last sort of 24 hours or so. So until we get more information as to how long this goes on, way too early for us to comment. What I would say is that, like any business, we don't plan for everything going right. So if this is a reasonably short-term event and we're back on our feet and operating, within a matter of a few weeks, then I think we're in a good position. Should this extend into something that is quite lengthy and difficult and on a much larger scale, then clearly we need to go back and have a look at how we see cash flowing and all the other things.
Thanks for joining us this evening. That is Air New Zealand CEO Greg Foran. It is about 17 minutes to 6. I'm Lisa Owen and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Police are stopping every vehicle heading in and out of the Auckland region to try and stop the virus spreading any further. There are 9 checkpoints on the city's fringes, and only people who usually live in Auckland or who are travelling to get home can come into the city. People who want to leave the city are only able to do so if they're headed home. Well, joining me now is the Police Commissioner, Andrew Costa. Good evening, Commissioner. How's it been going today? How compliant are people?
You look pretty good. I think people know what we need to do to get back to where we were before, and what we're seeing is a commitment to do the right thing.
How many people did you stop sneaking off or trying to sneak off to their batches?
It was a very small proportion of the total who presented at checkpoints, so we let a lot of legitimate freight and so on through, so Auckland keeps getting what it needs. A small number in the vicinity of 30 to 40 were turned around for a variety of reasons. Some people trying to visit friends just on the other side of the border. A small number who thought they would go to the holiday home, and they were turned around.
What was their excuse then when they were stopped and spoken to? Because it seems pretty clear, doesn't it?
Well, you would think so. We have to accept that some people may not understand the rules. That's why we're there. We educate them, and we've seen good compliance once they appreciate that going out is not an option.
So did you issue any warnings today, formal warnings?
I am awaiting, data on the full detail of that. What I can tell you in terms of what we did was over 200 reassurance patrols around parts of Auckland, supermarkets and the like, and close to 200 visits high visibility patrolling in key areas, be it places such as your testing stations and the like. So we've been very active. We've dealt with people. Most people have been very understanding once we've spoken to them. We haven't had to make any arrests, to my knowledge, so far.
So what resources is this taking up, the checkpoints in particular, and what would those officers normally be doing if they weren't standing there vetting every car that's coming in or out?
The checkpoints in total require about 40 officers at any one time. We're getting some support from NZDF to ease that burden. They'll just be working alongside police officers.
So how many staff from them, Commissioner, will you be using?
Probably we'd be looking to run a 50-50 mix. So at this stage, I understand we have about 50 defence staff available supporting us on those checkpoints. And those staff will be redeployed from other duties, and we know that our sort of volume decreases when we move into a lockdown situation, so we do have capacity to deal with it.
And are those members of the Defence Force, have they been at the checkpoints today?
Yes, I understand from this afternoon we started to have some defence staff come in, and they're helping to bolster our numbers, and we want to make sure that we strike the right balance between filtering those who shouldn't be passing through, but allowing legitimate freight and the like to keep moving.
Commissioner, is there really only 9 ways in and out of the super city?
At these particular lines, yes. So, for a very big area, Auckland is reasonably easy to contain. Obviously, though, the challenge is the volume of traffic, and we have seen some considerable delays, particularly at the northern end, and we'll keep fine-tuning that. But people have been very understanding.
What kind of delays?
So we've had, on the northbound, it peaked at about 1.5 hour delay for people, travelling out of the city at that point. That came down as the day went on. But, the message here is don't travel if you don't need to, essential travel only. We'll keep fine-tuning our part of it. But I think people realise that there's some inconvenience to achieve what we've achieved before, and that it's worth the effort.
So are you doing anything on the water?
No, look, we don't have boats lined up on the water at that point. In the end, if someone decided to boat or swim around, well, they might get there, but there's also quite a good chance they get spotted, and we do have the capability to deploy a boat if we need to. The key thing here is everyone will need to do their part for us to get on top of this, whether it's stopping the spread inside of Auckland or stopping the spread outside of Auckland. We've demonstrated as a country that we can do it, and I think we will.
So you can, if you need to, charge people, and then it becomes a court process, right? And we've heard in the past few weeks that there's been a bit of a backlog at court in relation to COVID matters. So do you actually have the power to issue instant fines, or is that something you need?
There is provision in the COVID Act for us to do that, and that's a capability that we can turn on if we need to.
And how do you do that? Is it your right to do it right now? If you wanted to start issuing instant fines, could you, or is there some process you have to go through?
The law exists. There's some system things that wouldn't take us at all long in order to be able to issue fines. Our enforcement approach here, as before, has been to start with encouragement and education, and that's where we're focused. If we saw widespread non-compliance, we'd have options. But
you have had a relative chunk of people who don't want to play ball, hence the charges and people going through court, which is quite a process and quite a number of resources. Why not fire this up and start giving out instant fines? And how much could you fine someone?
Look, we would need to gauge what's best in the situation. Most people, when spoken to, do the right thing, and those who don't, at times can be a bigger problem than can be fixed by a fine. So it's there as an option. I believe the fine is $500, but I would need to check that for you. It's an option that's there, but if in the end, if we're having to enforce against a large proportion of the population, we're probably losing the battle. We win this battle by doing it collectively, and that's what we're seeing people do at this point.
Speaking of courts, Commissioner, the police would obviously have a number of matters in Auckland that they would be hoping to get through the courts in the next few days, and presumably they've all shut up shop as well at the moment. So what happens there?
Yeah, it'll be essential business being managed through the courts at this stage. We do know that normal demand tends to decrease when we're in lockdown.
But so sentencing or trials... Sorry to interrupt, but sentencing or trials, there are sitting juries this week. Some are in deliberation. So are they all on hold for those matters?
Look, that will be likely the case if there was a trial mid-swing. I haven't had a direct update on that. It will cause disruption, and it's something that will need to be managed. But we've been working really closely with the Ministry of Justice and the Department of Corrections, and we were quite successful in working around some of these challenges in the previous lockdown, and we'll continue to work that way.
So no idea of the number of cases that might be on the back burner as a result of these 3 days?
No, not offhand. But at any point in time, you'd expect there to be, a number of trials underway. So those, obviously this kind of impact is not what you want, particularly not for the victims in a case. But this disruption is not what anyone wants, and it's not unexpected, and we just need to respond and manage it as quickly as we can.
Good to talk to you this evening. That is the Police Commissioner, Andrew Costa. Auckland's testing centres were inundated today as thousands of people lined up for COVID-19 tests. Even the early birds who showed up as sites opened couldn't escape the queues that saw hundreds of cars snake for miles. Some people were patient while others were cranky as they waited up to 4 hours for a swab. Annika Smith has the story.
It was an early start for some Aucklanders after a late-night announcement that from noon today, the city's 1.6 million inhabitants were shifting back into Alert Level 3.
I got here about 7:45, don't know what time it is now, so close to 2 hours.
From 7:30. It's very slow, doesn't move.
8 a.m. this morning, and it's been 3.5 hours, and I think we'll probably be tested hopefully within the next 2 hours.
People are now advised to call their doctor or healthline if they have COVID-19 symptoms. These include a cough, high temperature, sore throat, runny nose, shortness of breath or loss of smell. Healthline has fielded more than 2,000 calls so far, and there were no quick answers for those on the line.
There are currently 754 calls ahead of you. Your wait time will be approximately 119 minutes.
People also faced long waits at the city's testing centres and pop-up sites. Less than 12 hours after last night's emergency press conference, they were full steam ahead with lines of cars stretched out of sight in both directions at each facility. Clinical Director of the Eden Terrace Testing Centre, Dr Vanjdeep Tangri, says they expected a big workload, but not this much.
It is a long way. We're working hard at the moment to get through it. We've put extra staff on the floor as well. We've got extra nurses trained up as well. And we've also got extra people coming to manage to help with the traffic, because it is quite a lot of people coming in.
More than 1,600 Aucklanders were tested for COVID-19 by 1 o'clock this afternoon. Upgrades to Auckland's labs mean they can now process 7,000 to 8,000 swabs a day. Dr Vanjdeep Tangri says everyone is doing their best.
But I think they're all facing the same situation, and we are working on potentially having more testing facilities as well.
Across the bridge in Northcote, an essential worker lining up at a testing site says he's optimistic about how Auckland will be placed come Friday.
Just hoping that everything's back to normal by the weekend, honestly.
He says while he wants to avoid another full lockdown, he'd be happy to do it for the team.
If that's what's required for everyone to stay safe and everything, we'll just have to make do with that. I wouldn't want to, for sure, obviously, but if that's what's required, that's what's required. We just got to do it.
Many of those waiting at testing sites today weren't sick, but thought it was a good idea to be tested anyway. Official health advice remains that if you have symptoms, you should call your doctor or healthline, who can then advise if you need to be tested. The Prime Minister, Jacinda Ardern, says there's a risk the testing system will be overloaded if people don't follow official health advice.
That does not mean we just want to randomly test across Auckland people who have no symptoms. In fact, that runs the risk of creating longer queues, more tests to process without us being able to hone in on those we need to test the most. If you have no symptoms, and if you don't work in MIQ and you don't work at the border and you have no connection to any of those places and you are perfectly healthy and well, then please just comply with the requirements.
At this afternoon's press conference, she stressed this also applies to Healthline.
I understand, though, there are delays at the moment. I ask if you've got questions about level 3 restrictions for Auckland, please jump online and just free up those services for those who might need them for health or mental health reasons.
All testing centres are open 7 days a week, most open from 8 till 6, as well as a dozen urgent care clinics across the city. Extra pop-up clinics will run for the next 3 days, and existing centres will extend their hours. For Checkpoint, this is Annika Smith.
The shock lockdown has seen election season screech to a halt and may yet derail voting day altogether. Parliament was due to terminate today, marking the official end of term and the start of the campaign proper. Today, the Prime Minister announced the dissolution would be delayed until at least Monday. But the opposition wants the whole election delayed too. Here's our Deputy Political Editor, Craig McCulloch.
The return to Parliament a whole lot sooner than planned. Politicians swooping into the capital today from their campaign spots around the country. The big New Zealand First bus rolling into Parliament's forecourt to drop off its leader.
It is seriously frustrating, I've got to tell you.
The news of an outbreak stopping the campaign in its tracks, with all parties cancelling their plans for the coming days. National's big kick-off was scheduled for Sunday, but no more. Ex-leader David Seymour was supposed to be door-knocking today in Auckland.
I love getting out on the bus and talking to the people about the future of our country, but here we are back at Parliament talking to a bunch of journos. I guess such is life.
Today was supposed to be termination day, the dissolution of the 52nd Parliament. But in a time of uncertainty, that simply won't do. No Parliament would mean no way to urgently convene and pass legislation if required.
We've therefore decided it would be prudent to defer the dissolution of Parliament by at least a few days to preserve all options for, if needed, reconvening Parliament, or if needed for the purposes of the date of the general election.
And there's the big question for Jacinda Ardern. Given the outbreak, can the election even go ahead? The opposition parties don't think so.
If we are going to have level 2 or level 3 across the country into next week, I think it will be impossible to have a free and fair election. You cannot have an election when voters and people running for Parliament are effectively under house arrest.
It is simply unsustainable to expect there to be a fair and just election.
Judith Collins wants voting day delayed till at least November, and preferably well into next year. She has every incentive to push back the vote. On recent polling, Labour could govern alone. It's true, though, early voting is set to begin in just a few weeks, and Auckland boasts a third of the country. Under current restrictions, there can be no door-knocking, no large rallies, no certainty people will even be able to cast a ballot.
New Zealanders deserve better than to wonder whether or not they can even vote on election day.
Never mind the advantage wielded by Ms Ardern in a crisis, the power of the airwaves, and a direct line to the public every day. National's campaign manager Jerry Brownlee does not approve.
If it is just a plain health message, it should be delivered by the health officials.
She shouldn't be using the prime ministerial pulpit to secure the re-election of the Labour Party.
I would rather not be on this podium right now discussing what we are discussing.
The Electoral Commission has plans in place for an election under Alert Level 2 and will brief party leaders on the options available. The Prime Minister can delay the election till as late as November the 21st, but anywhere beyond that would require the support of at least 75% of MPs. Ms Ardern says she'll act fairly, but warns it's a tricky calculation as to when it will be safe to press on.
That's a real judgment because COVID isn't going to go away in the next 6 months.
A stark warning and a startling one given how the week began. More than 100 days without community transmission. Now an election campaign entangles. From Parliament for Checkpoint, Craig McCulloch.
Some feedback now before the news at 6. This person says Auckland COVID testing sites still overrun, have been in a queue for 2 hours, still not close to the testing station. Another listener says waiting in line 3 hours plus so far at Whitty for a COVID test. Totally ridiculous, terrible communication, direction and instruction from police directing traffic. Why not have more testing stations? More are coming. I've seen many cars leave due to waiting so long, trying to be a good citizen, but they're not making it easier. Joe says, went to Pack and Save Royal Oak today for the weekly food shop. People were patient and pleasant, negotiating the busy aisles. Supermarket workers were amazing. Can't speak highly enough of them. Salt of the earth, says Joe. Another person says, Aucklander here, I can't take it any longer. My mental health is already poor. We're likely to be isolated for further weeks now. This is like being socked in the mouth just as you're picking yourself up off the ground from hiding of your life.
RNZ News at 6. Ngā mihi nui ko Susana Leata tēnei. It's likely the number of COVID-19 cases in the community has doubled to 8 since last night, with 4 probable cases linked to the 4 confirmed cases in a South Auckland family. As well, there is 1 new case of a returned traveller who came from Islamabad in managed isolation. The Director General of Health says no close contacts of the family have been confirmed in Rotorua, where they visited at the weekend, and the city will remain at level 2. But Ashley Bloomfield says people who visited Waiora Lakeside Hotel, the Skyline Gondola and Heritage Farm and 3D Gallery should be vigilant. Late this afternoon, the Director General of Health, Ashley Bloomfield, used his special pandemic powers to order significant groups of people to isolate at home until they are spoken to by contact tracing services. The direction is for any workers or contractors employed at the cold store company Americold's Mount Wellington site and at the Dominion Road branch of the finance company Finance Now.
I would also say that the direction applies to the following, and that is any visitors to those workplaces in the last 14 days and any people who ordinarily live with those employees or contractors or visitors.
Ashley Bloomfield, 2 of the confirmed cases worked at the companies. The Health Minister won't be drawn on what alert levels the country might be in by the weekend. The Auckland region is currently at alert level 3 and the rest of the country has moved to alert level 2. Chris Hipkins says with the 4 probable cases today closely connected to the 4 confirmed in South Auckland, it's possible the transmission is still within a tightly controlled group. But he says health officials will have a better sense of how widespread COVID might be in the community in the next 48 hours.
At the moment, it would literally be crystal ball gazing for me to hypothesise what might happen on Friday, or what position we might be in on Friday.
Chris Hipkins speaking on Checkpoint. The Prime Minister says today is not the day to make a call on whether to delay the election. The National leader Judith Collins is calling for the election to be pushed out until November, or preferably sometime next year. She is also accusing Jacinda Ardern of not being fully transparent with the opposition. Ms Ardern says the dissolution of Parliament has been delayed until Monday, giving the government time to make a decision. She says the focus in the coming days needs to be on the health response.
There should not be politics in this. It's a resurgence that no one wanted, so let's work hard together to get on top of it, and then we can get back to the normal resumption of whatever politicking the opposition would like to engage in at that point.
Jacinda Ardern. Police say they have not arrested anyone at a testing station in Hamilton. A police spokesperson confirmed a man in line for a test was spoken to by officers briefly today, but he was not arrested. The mortgage deferral scheme due to run out next month is to be extended. Reserve Bank Governor Adrian Orr says the extension is still being worked out and further details will be released next week. Latest numbers from the banks show more than 88,000 people had reduced loan payments worth $27 billion, with another 61,000 deferring repayments worth nearly $21 billion. Mr Orr says consumers shouldn't rush their banks to do deals.
I want to encourage people not to suddenly grab their telephones and start ringing their banks, because their banks do not have the details and the banks do not have the current capacity or capability to be dealing with that issue at the moment.
The Reserve Bank today held its benchmark rate steady but significantly increased its bond buying program to keep cash in the economy and a cap on interest rates. The local share market has had its worst session in a month after the re-emergence of COVID-19 in Auckland and the restrictions imposed on businesses. The benchmark Top 50 index opened more than 2% lower, but trimmed its losses to close down at 153 points to 1.3%. It's coming up to 4.5 minutes past 6. New Zealand Rugby are hanging on in the hope the final round of Super Rugby Aotearoa can be played this weekend. The country's shift back up the COVID-19 alert levels until at least midnight Friday has put both matches in serious doubt. As it stands, Sunday's sold-out Blues Crusaders match in Auckland could not go ahead, while Saturday's Highlanders Hurricanes game in Dunedin could, but without fans. The national body's preference is to play the matches this weekend rather than postponed until next weekend. NZR General Manager for Professional Rugby and Performance, Chris Lendrum, says the fact the Crusaders have already won the title hasn't been a factor in their decision to continue waiting.
I think everybody involved, players, teams, fans, want rugby to go ahead this weekend. We've seen the benefits of rugby restarting and what it's done for the mood of the rugby community and the mood of the country as a whole over the last 9 weeks. It'd be great to finish that out.
Meanwhile, the final round of netball's ANZ Premiership has been called off due to the change in COVID-19 alert levels around the country. Netball New Zealand has declared all matches a draw, but still hopes to go ahead with the finals weekend in Invercargill next week. The decision has had no effect on placings for the final series, with the defending champion Central Pulse playing the mainland Tactics in the grand final. That's the news.
This is an official government COVID-19 announcement. The Auckland region is now at COVID-19 Alert Level 3. The rest of New Zealand has moved to Alert Level 2. Positive cases of COVID-19 have been identified in a household in the Auckland region. If you are in Auckland, stay home where possible and follow Alert Level 3 guidelines. This will stop the transmission of COVID-19 and save lives. For more information on the alert levels, go to covid19.govt.nz.
Now, the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow. Northland, a few showers. Auckland to Kapiti, including Coromandel, Bay of Plenty and Central High Country. Generally fine with a few cloudy areas. Isolated showers about Coromandel and Taihape clearing tonight. Gisborne and Hawke's Bay, scattered showers, gradually clearing tomorrow. Wairarapa and Wellington, a few showers, clearing tonight and fine spells developing. Showers returning to Wellington tomorrow night. Marlborough and Canterbury, mostly fine with a few cloudy areas. Showers spreading north about Canterbury and the Kaikoura coast tomorrow. For Nelson, Buller and Westland, fine weather, apart from isolated showers in Buller, spreading to Westland tomorrow. Otago, Southland and Fiordland, a few showers mainly about the south coast. Showers spreading elsewhere tomorrow morning and snow lowering to 400 metres in the south. Chatham Islands, cloudy periods, a few showers tomorrow night. RNZ National. We're funded through New Zealand On Air. It's coming up to 7.5 minutes past 6.
Thanks, Susanna. If you're just joining us, this is Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen. Level 3 restrictions in our largest city means many businesses have been forced to shut their doors until at least midnight Friday. And for some, it could be the final straw after struggling to keep going during lockdown. More than $13 billion has already been paid out in wage subsidies, and almost 466,500 jobs are still being supported by the second wave of the fund that's due to end next month. The rest of New Zealand's at level 2, meaning events are restricted to a maximum of 100 people, and restaurants and bars have to keep customers separated, seated and served by a single person. Brett O'Reilly is the Chief Executive of the EMA and joins me now. Brett, I imagine this was difficult news for a lot of businesses. What have they been telling you about what it means for them?
Kia ora, Lisa. Look, it isn't positive news, and I think one of the things that has exacerbated it not being positive is some of the confused messaging out there. We've been saying a lot today, this is not a lockdown. This is alert level 3. So businesses can still operate, not all, and you've rightly pointed out that if you're in retail and hospitality, that can be tricky. But the guidelines are there to enable businesses to work, and some of the messaging coming out of the Ministry of Health has not been helpful, saying that only essential services could operate. That is not the case. This is alert level 3, and if businesses comply with the work guidelines, yes, if people can work from home, they should. But there are many businesses that can't, and those businesses should still be trying to operate within the guidelines that we've got. So it's important that we don't have businesses closing that could be operating, and so we're pushing really hard around that messaging, and we're also making representations to government to make sure that the messaging coming through this whole process is consistent.
So that's you can be contactless. As long as it's contactless with your customers, you can keep operating. Is there a particular example of a business type that you're thinking of here that is it's not clear whether they're able to open or not?
Well, we had a small construction business told today by the Ministry of Health that they could not open because they weren't an essential service. I mean, that is just not accurate. As long as they practice social distancing and they wear masks, and they can still operate. And so we think it's really important that that messaging is consistent, and where possible, where businesses can continue to operate, they do.
So did that company carry on working then, Brett?
They stopped, and actually, they took the advice seriously and went out and advised their customers, but then contacted us because they started to hear some alternative messaging. So hopefully they'll be back in operation tomorrow. And as long as they are following the guidelines, as long as they've got the QR code up, so they can be tracking, then they should be able to operate.
Is this going to push some people to the wall in the sense that there may not be as many customers around? Sometimes it's not an effective operating model with the restrictions on it. Are you expecting more businesses to go under?
I think that's a real possibility. We've been talking to government agencies today around, at their invitation, I might add, around what options there might be around the wage subsidy and around alternative, other forms of assistance for business. Of course, it's very early days. At the moment, we've been told it's 72 hours. Personally, I think it's probably likely to be longer than that as more news is unfolding.
What are you planning for, Brett?
Too early to say, but it's very clear that this is not a small situation that we're dealing with. So we're certainly preparing, for level 3 to continue, and I sincerely hope that's not the case. But I think we have to be prudent around that. So therefore, in that situation, we want to make sure that those businesses that can operate do. I think to your point, yeah, absolutely, there are going to be some businesses that this is going to feel like the last straw. And we just need to make sure in that situation that they are equipped with all of the information that we can possibly get in front of them through organisations like the EMA and the Business New Zealand Network and through government, so that they're making those decisions, with all of those available facts.
So, Brett, are you making representations to Grant Robertson or anyone in the government to extend the wage subsidy?
Well, we're talking about that. Yes, we are.
And what would you need? How long more?
Well, that's a difficult question. Remember that with the wage subsidy extension, that still is open until the 1st of September. So as businesses are going through this alert level 3 in Auckland at the moment, and it will be impacting businesses outside of Auckland as well, because there are many businesses that are supplying Auckland businesses. Right up until the 1st of September, they've still got that opportunity to apply under the 40% impact. So that will continue, and there'll be some businesses who may not have qualified up until now that will now qualify because of that threshold. Obviously, what we're starting to talk about is, what happens beyond the 1st of September. So we're monitoring the situation. We're doing a lot of, talking to a lot of our members and doing a lot of data gathering so we can really understand those impacts. I think the other area is probably around property. Obviously, when we went through the alert levels before, we know that one of the big costs for businesses is the cost of their property. It's unrealistic to expect landlords just to keep eating rent reductions, and so that's another area that we'll be talking to the government about. because obviously for retail and for hospitality, that's a big fixed cost, and if you're not open, well then you've got very limited ability to be able to generate enough revenue to pay for that.
Brett, we're almost out of time, but you've been talking to Treasury. Are they making positive noises in your direction?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, they've been very good to deal with right through this process with the wage subsidy, and so they're interested in continuing the dialogue. So if we do need to make some adjustments to the wage subsidy, we're equipped with the right information around that.
Thank you for your time this evening. That's Brett O'Reilly, who's the Chief Executive of the EMA. 9 police checkpoints have now been set up around the perimeter of Auckland as its 1.6 million residents return to level 3 lockdown. With Auckland now ground zero for the community transmission COVID cases, the city has effectively shut its borders to try and stop the virus spreading further. Chen Liu and cameraman Dan Cook filed this report.
Okay, and where do you reside?
The super city sealed off. Roadblocks have been put in place at the Bombay South off-ramp on Mill Road and Ridge Road North off-ramp. Road Policing Team Supervisor for Counties Manukau South, Sergeant Andrew Heath, is leading the operation.
Essential business, people are travelling to essential work, from essential work. People who are travelling for social purposes will be directed to turn around and return to where they've come from.
Sergeant Heath says they are relying on people's honesty. People breaching the rules can be arrested, but he says that's a last resort measure.
All the heavy trucks are going to be directed to carry on the motorway. All the light vehicles are going to be directed off the motorway, where they'll be brought up. They'll be spoken to by a police officer. The purpose of the journey will be ascertained and then directed to either travel on or return home.
The checkpoints are similar to those seen during level 3 ahead of the long weekends, which often nabbed motorists trying to head away for a holiday. Drivers pulling up today were met by officers in masks and gloves and had to explain where they were going and why. Thousands of people would normally move in and out of Auckland every day, but for now they have to stay put. The South Auckland suburb of Pukekohe is just within the level 3 zone. Carla Southern is a local hairdresser there. She says it was a frantic morning as people rushed around town for last-minute essentials.
If we're doing it in the interest of keeping everybody safe, and reflecting on what's happening out there in the world and what's happening in Australia, I think it's the very best thing we should be doing right now.
She says it's a nerve-wracking time as a business owner, but she's backing the move to level 3.
Oh, absolutely. I think every business owner is concerned at these times. We've had a lot of clients who own businesses themselves that have been deeply affected. A lot of clients deeply affected with redundancies, especially people in the tourism industry. So I think, if any business owners out there, we would all say that we're very, very concerned. But we bounced back after the last lockdown, and we'll bounce back again. I think it's a state of mind, keeping positive and looking forward to, a better outcome.
Jenny Spratt was among those doing her usual shop with a few lockdown extras.
Just groceries and green groceries, veggies. And I'm going to get some painting canvases so I can do some painting.
Rewan Butlett is a cleaner for Auckland Council. She was told to stay home today and isn't too bothered by the lockdown, but fears what may be yet to come.
I'm more worried about the second wave, but I think so far it's going so well.
Police say they are waiting on guidance from the government over how long the roadblocks will be in place. Motahoraka o te ahiahine ko Chenliu tēnei.
It's 18 minutes past 6 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. The return to level 2 has been described as a kick in the guts for South Island businesses, which were just getting back on their feet. Last night's announcement triggered a flood of trip cancellations, and tourism operators fear that if Auckland's level 3 restrictions drag on, they won't survive without their visits south. Our reporter Tess Brunton has more.
Queenstown Lakes District Mayor Jim Bolt says it's devastating news, but he understands why the restrictions are needed.
We were just starting to see that businesses could actually survive on a domestic market alone. Clearly the biggest part of that is Auckland. At this stage it's said that it's only going to be 3 days, but I'm concerned that it is going to be a lot longer than that. If that's the case, it will be a real kick in the guts for our district.
Mr. Bolt says Queenstown remains open for business, but he's worried confidence in travel could drop. Villa del Lago owner Nick Kittle says his Queenstown hotel's occupancy rate reached up to 70% of normal levels in recent weeks, with healthy demand from Aucklanders. But he's already seeing the fallout from the increased restrictions.
We've had phone calls starting from last night and then through the morning, and we've received a number of emails with people who are not going to be able to get here, or at least wanting to take the precaution that they may not be able to get here. So yes, cancellations are literally pouring in the door.
ZipTrack Eco Tours Executive Director Trent Yeo is preparing for the worst and hoping for the best as they field cancellations.
No one really knows how deep this could go. I think that if this sort of bounces off the edge and we get to something else on Friday or Saturday, we'll be fine. If we go deeper into something, that's a whole other thing. We'd have to reassess as we go.
While the community transmission cases are centred in Auckland at this stage, some Christchurch residents aren't taking any chances. About 40 cars were waiting in line at a COVID testing station in Aranui. Manu Vehikite was feeling fine, but after a recent trip to Auckland, wants to be sure she isn't infected.
I've been waiting for over 2 hours now, but I'm willing to wait because I've got elderly mother at home and my kids, and I want to protect ourselves from the COVID-19. And because I just came back from Auckland yesterday, and that's why I'm a bit nervous about it.
Georgie Dormer was in the queue after her husband recently came back from Auckland with a cold.
I would say we're not actually concerned now. It's more being kind of socially responsible more than anything.
Right, just to be super careful.
Yeah, well, just for everyone else's peace of mind, not necessarily our own.
In Nelson, people reacted to the latest message by staying away from the central city. The head of the inner city promotions group, Uniquely Nelson, Simon Duffy, says the city rallied after the last lockdown, but is now quiet again.
Yes, it is. It is. And I noticed this morning at the supermarket, New World, masks are gone back on. We've just put up all the to sign into the office, so we're gearing up. Those things get put back in place, so people were a bit nervous, and we'll have to see what comes out of Auckland. And I think Auckland will probably go longer than 3 days. Nip it in the bud.
Nelson Cafe owner Gary Warner says business since lockdown ended has been up and down. But today...
It's scarily quiet in town today. Apart from, I was at the pasta supermarket earlier and we seem to have the usual obligatory lineup.
While restrictions are scheduled to last until midnight on Friday, many say they're bracing for the long haul. For Checkpoint, Cortes Brunton, TNA.
Meanwhile, in Wellington, many supermarkets saw floods of shoppers stocking up on supplies and retailers and cafes dusting off the old COVID tracing posters and social distancing signs. Despite Wellington only going to COVID alert level 2, some events in the capital are being postponed or cancelled due to the uncertainty of where these new COVID cases came from. Our reporter Logan Church and cameraman Dom Thomas filed this report.
As soon as the Crofton Downs countdown opened, those all too familiar lines out the door started forming as people rushed to get groceries. Packing freshly bought food into his boot, Gary says he's cancelled travel plans due to the new cases.
I thought I'd just do a little bit of shopping because we were going to go away to New Plymouth in a few days, but obviously that's down the gurgler. So it's time to stack up the house again since we didn't have much food in. You know, when you see what's happening in Australia, I hate to think what they're going to find in Auckland.
A few cars down, Diane Parker is also stocking up on essentials.
I thought I'd come and do my Friday shop today rather than when things happen and if it gets bad. I never get in or I have to wait in a line. The queues are right back to the milk line. Like the supermarket obviously are preparing, but they're not quite prepared, for the craziness.
Retail and hospitality businesses across the region have now reinstalled contact tracing signs and social distancing markers on the ground. Michael Gray, the owner of Buzz Cafe in Lower Hutt, is sticking up instructions on seating and service on his front door when we visited.
We've separated tables again, so we're back to level 2 and, it's sanitised all the time. It's 2 metres at the counter, make sure we're serving the people right. With staff, I've met with them and made sure we're back onto track again.
He was gutted when the new cases were announced last night and the subsequent Auckland lockdown. In Lower Hutt, he says many businesses around him were just getting back on their feet and things were ticking along okay. But he's concerned shoppers might keep their wallets firmly in their pockets due to the uncertainty.
Yes, it's going to be limited, and people are probably going to spend their money a little bit wisely now. So there'll be a little hold back for a little bit. But let's hope in 3 days they've found it and done something about it.
That's a view shared by Matt McLaughlin, Panhead Tory Street bar owner and Wellington Hospitality NZ branch president.
We're still here in Wellington, we're still open, so that's better than being closed, so we're in a better position obviously than Auckland, but it does mean that our business does squeeze up. I think the biggest thing probably is almost the fear factor of our patrons not wanting to come out. So we can still open, we've just got the 3 S's again, we've got to separate, single server and people have got to be seated.
The source of these new COVID cases remain unknown, although we do know one of those infected travelled to Rotorua while symptomatic. The Director General of Health confirmed if new cases were picked up outside Auckland, a nationwide response was needed. Mr McLaughlin says the impact of that would be devastating.
We're only just getting back on our feet from the last lockdown, and I think another lockdown would see some significant changes in our industry. There'll be a lot of businesses that go bust. I know that people are teetering already and have really struggled through, but we've been able to fight for another day. Whereas if we go into another level 4 lockdown, we won't be able to fight for another day, and it'll be devastating for the industry.
Meanwhile, events in the Greater Wellington region are being cancelled or postponed due to the new cases. Poreroa's Mayor Anita Baker says the council was planning to hold its Love Local Expo this weekend, an event aimed at boosting the profile of local businesses after the first COVID lockdown.
We've postponed our Love Local Expo. We will have it again when we get we'll get back to level 1. We've had over 130 businesses get on board. We're asking people to still support the local businesses because buying and selling in Poreroa is really important for us.
It's now a nervous wait for non-Aucklanders, while the Ministry of Health tries to figure out how far, if at all, COVID-19 has spread. For Checkpoint, Logan Church.
Today's rapid move to level 3 and level 2 has in part been in a bid to avoid what's happening across the Tasman. Victoria today recorded its deadliest day since the pandemic began. 21 deaths in the last 24 hours. New infections also remain stubbornly high, with a further 410 new cases confirmed today. Victorian Premier Daniel Andrews says the state's strict lockdown measures are beginning to make a slow difference.
Well, it's certainly flattening it, and we have seen, if you look at the average over the last 7 days, we are seeing the line come down. Ultimately, tonight at midnight marks 1 week of the most significant elements of the stage 4, so workplaces. That's what really drives down movement. To that end, we all know that a week is not the life cycle of this virus. It's certainly longer than that.
Meanwhile, New South Wales has reported 18 new cases, 5 of which are not linked to known clusters. The state's Chief Medical Officer, Kerry Chant, says there's evidence the virus is spreading in Sydney.
Those cases are predominantly occurring in southwestern Sydney and western Sydney, and I do urge those members of the community in southwestern Sydney and western Sydney to particularly come forward for testing should they have the most minimal of symptoms.
North of the border, there's some good news for Queensland. The Sunshine State once again recorded no new cases today. Back home, in the final round of netball's ANZ Premiership has been called off due to the change in COVID-19 alert levels around the country. Netball New Zealand has declared all matches a draw, but still hopes to go ahead with the finals weekend in Invercargill next week, where the defending champions, the Central Pulse, will play the Mainland Tactics in the grand final. Netball New Zealand Chief Executive Jenny Wiley told sports editor Stephen Hewson they expect to make a decision on whether the grand final goes ahead early next week.
It really is disappointing, but it's the right thing to do for the players, the management and everyone involved. And unfortunately, it does mean that we won't see some great netball this weekend, but, there'll be more to come.
Did you have a plan in place around this, given, I suppose, the virus and the way things have been going?
Yeah, look, I think even when we moved out of level 4, we had a plan in terms of what happens if we saw a resurgence. And I think it's taking that plan, tweaking it for what we now know, But I think it was just a no-brainer that this weekend's games couldn't continue.
Hopefully you'll still get a grand final in though.
Yeah, we're really positive about getting a grand final in. Obviously, there'll be some protocols that we need to consider, but we've got thinking around that underway already, and we hope to be able to make a decision once we get a bit more understanding, had a chance to talk with the Ministry of Health and making sure that our plans are robust enough under the WorkSafe and all of those kind of guidance so that we have no risk to our people who might be either participating or attending those games. So, we've got to make sure we get all our ducks in a row first before we make that decision.
Can you leave it as late as, when can you leave it as late till, do you think?
I think we'll pretty much know once the government set a position or a course for the next couple of weeks come Friday. We'll be able to finalise plans and to be able to settle those in pretty soon, early next week.
And that's Jenny Wiley there. Before we go, Hayden's got in touch to say, I've spent 7 hours waiting to get tested at Northcote. They've just shut down the queue because the security guard knocks off at 8 and they've already got too many cars on site waiting. Heading home, no test, gutted. And that's reflective of a lot of the feedback we're getting from you too. Another person says a lot of people heading to their holiday homes in Thames. Not supposed to do that. Play by the rules. We will be back tomorrow.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. 4 new probable cases of COVID-19 are linked to the 4 cases in a South Auckland family confirmed last night. Workers at 2 Auckland branches of Americold and Finance Now have been ordered to isolate at home until spoken to by contact tracing officials. The Prime Minister says today is not the day to make a call on delaying the election. The local share market has had its worst session in a month after the re-emergence of COVID-19 in Auckland. That's the news.
Tonight on Nights, we're announcing the winner of this year's Children's Book Awards. Once we know who it is, Simon Morris reviews the latest Kiwi flick, This Town. Rupert Gray talks about his adventure driving a 1936 Rolls-Royce across India in 2019. And of course, as Auckland heads back to level 3 and the rest of the country level 2, we'll keep you updated on the COVID situation across